Now at the top of the hour, we have chit chat, and let's welcome Zach Stein to talk with us about the future and education and the edge of history. As I was saying, time between worlds. So most welcome, Zach. Please bring us your wisdom and sharings for us to start this moment.
Thank you, everyone. So I'll just hit the ground running, and then my sense is, how long was I expected to speak here? I can speak endlessly about this, so I don't want to speak.
Well, 10 minutes, it would be wonderful for us to, afterwards we will have the updates from the networks, but I'm sure endless would be wonderful also.
Yeah, so a few things I'll say. Last time I spoke at this group, I spoke about John Amos Comenius, who lived in the 17th century and was actually, he's not well known now unless you're, from Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia. But he was in many ways one of the most important educational thinkers who ever lived. And he, you could argue, came up with the first notion of Bildung, in the sense that Bildung is traced to the notion of image, which is the German word there, and that the living in the image of God, or education that was able to bring people into the image of God or the image of Christ, was a universal definition of education that he wanted to bring to every man, woman, and child in every language of every religion. So it was the birth of modern education. And he was dealing with the end of history. He was dealing with the edge of history. Comenius was trying to solve a problem, and the problem was the end of the world. Literally, he was witnessing the demise of the feudal kind of regimes in the context of a total religious war that devastated Europe, the 30 Years' War. And he was looking at unprecedented technologies, both the printing press and agricultural, and things like the Dutch East India Company. And so he was knowingly, reflectively, this is part of the book that I'm writing on him, at the end of one world, at the beginning of another one. And so he had an image of the future, which he tried to move circuitously through this time of total war, organizing an invisible college, which eventually became explicit in the Royal Society, 1660 something, which birthed us the Enlightenment, which gave us something like a new world, for better or for worse. Again, that's not Comenius's Enlightenment isn't the Enlightenment that we have now. His was very different. So what we have to do now as educators is realize we're in a comparable position. And this is what I was trying to say last time, that we are at the end of the world, and we're witnessing the collapse of, I see Jim Rutt here, so I'll say game A civilization. And so what that means is that we have an image of the future as educators that needs to be pretty radically different from as if the future would be predictable, as different from the kinds of educational systems Comenius instituted, which we know of as like nationwide state education that seeks to reach everybody, as different as that is from feudal education systems, which are small, elitist, and built around religion, etc. So he was looking at the end of religion in one sense, a post-religious age. He was looking at the end of feudalism, a post-feudalistic, what we now call the birth of capitalistic age. So similarly, I'll say a few things about the image of the future that we need to factor if we're going to reweave a world out of the pieces of this one that lays kind of around us in tatters. So one of the things we need to think about is that whereas Comenius was trying to solve a problem that gave us the nation state, we're trying to solve a problem that gives us something like a planetary community, that we're looking at a future that's planetary. Doesn't mean globalization. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about planetization, which is a different process. So that's a distinction. We're also looking at a future that has to do with high technology, possibly even exponentially accelerating technology, and specifically artificial intelligence. So if you're thinking seriously as an educator about forms of education that will give us a civilization that could actually exist in perpetuity on this planet, you have to be factoring the planetary vector, and you have to be factoring artificial intelligence. So there's others on this list. The future is a future of risk, specifically existential risk. So this is work like Ulrich Beck and others at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at Oxford. Some of the work that I do with Daniel Schmachtenberger falls under this heading. So that means, and AI is one of these risks. It's a world that's irrevocably risky, and levels of risk that we haven't seen. It's a specific sociological context, which I won't unpack, but there are forms of risk which our society faces that are planetary and totalizing, which are unprecedented, which means that we don't know how to teach young children how to think about self-induced species extinction, right? We've long taught children to think about things like the apocalypse, which is an ordered ending, actually a moral ending, right? But self-induced species extinction through some kind of totalizing technological failure, let's say, not even a war, just a mistake, is completely possible right now. It has been possible since the bomb. We've become numb to the reality of totalized existential risk, but we have to relieve that numbness. And this is an educational challenge. And this is what I'm saying, because it's impending. We can no longer be asleep to that dynamic. And I also believe that we're looking at a future that is post-secular. So where insofar Comenius was witnessing the contextualization of religion, it was like religion as the dominant thing that runs all of society. We're not doing that anymore. This was Comenius, and we're doing something different. Separation of church and state, hegemony of science, right? Usual dismissal of religion. Claim by sociologists that religion's over, right? That claim did not pan out. This is being admitted now, especially by European sociologists. Both fundamentalism and revivalism and new religions, and people who say they don't go to religions, who actually identify on senses as spiritual, but not religious, right? So a revivification of a post-secular kind of education is also essential, and it's related to these other things, right? In order to look at individual death, you could argue the human invented religion, right? We need something comparable to face collective death. So there's an innovation at the level of superstructure and religion that's necessary. That's another educational challenge. And finally, I think we're looking at a future that needs to be post-tragic. What that means is that, and this is again a kind of Comenian reconfiguration of what was basically essential. The scientific worldview, the Enlightenment worldview, is one that is predicated upon articulating problems that can be solvable. Like, for example, death. We're solving death now. I don't know if you guys heard that. Huge venture capital going into solving death at the company Alphabet, which used to be Google, right? So this is an example of like a strange thing, an interesting thing, but a strange thing, given the long hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years that humans have died. And so my sense is that we're going to have to be looking at catastrophe in a way that isn't just concerned with efficiency and problem solving. And this means that living in tragedy, coping with tragedy. COVID has been a taste of this. But if the catastrophic risks and the potentialities in them are real, then we're going to be in situations where billions of people watch millions die. Survivor's guilt on the other side of civilizational collapse is an educational challenge. So we're looking at situations where we need to have new ways of speaking about very profound things because they're going to be unfolding. And the degree to which we run propaganda campaigns, like the public health campaigns related around the pandemic, as if we're still in the 60s and 70s, like in a broadcast modality, The propaganda campaigns will continue to fail, and will continue to fragment. So yeah, innovation at the level of meaning making around tragedy, what I often call the post-tragic, is another aspect of that image, right? So we're looking at the planetary, the high technology, especially AI, risk, ubiquitous risk, catastrophic and existential risk, post-secularity, and post-tragic. This is like the image that I'm seeing congealing. And it's an image that makes obsolete the forms of schooling that we currently have. AI alone does that. The internet and digital alone does that. But anyway, there's more to say. I don't want to go over time. Like I said, I could speak forever. So I will.
Talking deeper in a different way, using education in a different way, bringing meaningful and another meaning to tragedy and to some collapse that we are living in this transition as a planetary community. Some questions that you would like to bring to Zach about the content he brought us about the future and all of this that is going around the world. This is the moment for some open questions to Zach.
My question has to do with kind of a ratio or proportion. That do you think we need to make a shift in terms of, for example, 90% or 80% or 70% of education being geared towards preparation for this, what did you call it, a post, not a post-apocalyptic, but you used the word post-tragic world.
Hopefully not post-apocalyptic. That's what we're trying to avoid here. Yeah, that's right.
But in terms of that, maybe 30% of education ought to be, the basics and competency and preparing for tests and that type of thing. But 70% in terms of preparation for the crisis that we're in and preparation for adaptation of each individual to what they're going to do in society. Because wouldn't you agree with me that we have these proportions wrong currently?
It's a good question. I mean, so a few things I'll say in general, because I don't know specifically, frankly, but it is the case that as world systems get complex and the broader context change, especially economic context change, then the quote meta curricula of the institutions changes again, for better and for worse. Like when it was the case that when you left schools, you went into factories, the meta curriculum of schooling changed. And so similarly now, if it's the case that you leave schools and you don't get a job because it's all been automated by AI, then the meta curriculum must change. A lot depends upon what you mean by preparation for the crisis. So as a developmentalist, I think we're making mistakes when we beat kids over the head with information about climate change, for example. Like I think we're prematurely traumatizing kids as a result of exposing them to certain things. So there's complex discussions to have about what it means to prepare, how to build emotional resilience, and what the nature of the content actually is. Like, do kids need to know about the economics? Like, at what age do we teach them about fiat currency, right? At what age do we teach them about fictitious capital? Like, so there are these questions about what's the actual content that's needed in the meta curriculum. And of course, teacherly practice changes. We used to have one-room schoolhouses where there was multiple generations that in there, and we didn't age segregate. I'm predicting a return to that model. A lot of that happened during COVID because every living room became a classroom and you had siblings and you had pods. But I think that model of older kids teaching younger kids is actually very important. And then the model of distribution of responsibility for what occurs in the classroom so that the kids feel like they have actual responsibilities that matter in the world, also important. And I think some of that's the trick. Much of the preparation is actually ethical, I believe. And if that word is a problem, then pick another one. Moral, people hate morality. I feel like ethics is an okay word. Obligation is taboo, but we need to start thinking very seriously about what it means to take on real responsibility in contexts that are going to be dilemmatic, like moral dilemma and tragedy, right? These are things. So it's like, this is part of the preparation. What does that actually look like? It's a very important question. To me, it looks like strengthening the family and a whole bunch of other things that have nothing to do with what goes on at schools.